down a late night rabbit hole of what am I meant to do and why haven't I found it yet? And let's be honest, who hasn't? Then you're in the right place. I'm Theresa White, career clarity expert and 5-time certified career coach, and I'm here to help you navigate the question of how to find a career that truly lights you up. On Career Clarity Unlocked, we're all about those light bulb moments. I'm talking to people who are still trying to figure out what they're meant to do, coaching them live to reach that magical, yes, this is it moment. And we'll also hear from those who've already found their dream careers and figure out exactly how they did it. Whether you're looking for inspiration or actionable advice on finding a career you love, I've got you covered. Time to unlock some career clarity. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Career Clarity Unlocked. I just had a post go viral on LinkedIn about my top 5 tips to succeed in job interviews. And I got inbox loads full of questions on how to stand out and actually turn interviews into offers. So there seems to be a huge demand, and I want to take this opportunity here on this episode to answer all your questions and provide you with actionable tips that help you stand out in job interviews. So let's dive right in. There are 5 things that are most important to get right in your interview, and we're going to go through all 5 of them in detail. The first one is tell me about yourself. That is the beginning of the interview. You want to start the interview strong. That beginning is so important. That's going to make or break the interview, because the interviewer after that first answer is like, I don't think I need to pay attention to this. Let's just get this over with. Or they are like, ooh, I better pay attention here. This is worth my time. The next part are sharing specific accomplishment stories. Third is asking good questions at the end. Then number 4 is a strong close. And the last piece is sending in your thank you note. So let's walk through all of those. I'm going to make this as actionable as possible for you. And if you're driving, on a run, on the go, I will have a handout prepared for you that you can download for free so that you don't have to take notes as you're listening to me, and you're going to have the most important points summarized on there for you. All right, let's start with number 1. Tell me about yourself. Generally, that is the first question that you get in an interview. It can be asked in a variety of different ways. It might be walk me through your resume, which, by the way, does not mean you're supposed to walk them through your resume. But what the goal of that question is the interviewer asking like, hey, who are you? And is this worth my time? Am I supposed to pay attention here or not? So that is your make or break. You've got to really practice your tell me about yourself answer. And my handout for this episode has a guide and a worksheet that walks you through how to prep that answer. So first of all, to have a successful tell me about yourself answer, right away, you want to address the problem that the person hired into this role will be expected to solve. That's what you want to start off with. Because then they are right away like, oh, she gets it. She knows why we're hiring for this role. You can't start off better than that. Follow that by a brief introduction with your current or last position title, the industry, and your numbers of years of experience. Then you want to bring in your superpower. What is it that you want to be known for? What should the interviewer most know about you that differentiates you from all the other candidates? Back that up very briefly with a relevant accomplishment, and then tie it back how it applies to this job. And don't forget to put in the passion or excitement that you have for this role. A really common mistake that I saw, I don't even want to call it a mistake, a really common occurrence that I saw when I was the recruiter and hiring for a lot of roles and interviewing a lot of candidates, was that people get really nervous in interviews. And if there's demand, let me know. Comment on this episode if you want me to do a separate episode on calming interview nerves, because that is a big deal for a lot of people. It's a super stressful situation. But what it does for a lot of people is it takes out all our excitement and passion, and we become very stoic. And that's not how you want to show up in an interview. Of course, you don't want to be over the top. but they need to see your passion or excitement for the role you're applying to. So, going back to the tell me about yourself, we're starting with what is the problem this role exists to solve? I'm going to give you an example of how this sounds. Let's, for example, take a role at a B Corp that exists because the B Corp needs to be connected with clients and investors. So that's the problem this role exists to solve. So we start our interview answer with, thanks so much for having me today. I'm really excited for this conversation, especially because I am so passionate about connecting B Corps with clients and investors. Then we want to briefly bring in your background. That might sound like, for the past 6 years, I have served as the account executive and brand ambassador at X, Y, and Z company. Now we want to highlight your superpower. What is it you want to be known for? For example, I excel at growing a community through winning others over and building thriving relationships. We don't just want to show, we want to tell them how we did that. So adding in a very brief accomplishment. For example, I expanded a community from 7 to 165 residents and increased my company's market share by over 220% within 14 months. Now we want to tie it back to why we're here, to this role. And that might sound like, this opportunity at ABC B Corp caught my attention because I am so passionate about increasing awareness around innovative solutions to single-use plastic. And with my experience, I am confident that I would make an impact quickly in engaging, connecting, and building relationships with your clients and investors. Now, that is an answer that makes sure the interviewer pays attention to you. You gave them everything that they wanted to hear. You told them that you understand the problem for why the role exists, and you told them why you're the solution to that problem, and you backed that up that you've solved a similar problem in the past. Now you've got their attention. Now moving into the rest of the interview questions. The next thing you want to make sure that you get right are your accomplishment stories. In a lot of interviews, in pretty much all interviews, you're going to be asked behavioral interview questions. Behavioral interview questions are questions that ask you to describe your past experience, to demonstrate how you handle situations, how you solve problems, how you work with others, or how you achieve results. So in order to prepare for those, what you want to do is you don't want to prepare perfect interview answers to every question that could be asked, but you want to prepare 5 accomplishment stories. The biggest mistake you can make in an interview is not to provide them with a specific story. If you're asked, for example, tell me about a time where you handled a difficult customer situation. The worst thing you can do is say, well, in general, if there is a conflict with a customer or a dispute, I do X, Y, and Z, and that usually leads to X, Y, and Z, and then we do A, B, and C. That might all be right and great, but the interviewer cannot see you and picture you actually doing that. Because what you're telling them is what you do in general. You're not walking them through one specific story. So, in order to prepare for your interviews, identify your top 5 accomplishments that are relevant to that position you're interviewing for. You can drop in the jobs posting into ChatGPT or your AI of choice and ask it to identify the 5 most important skills they're looking for. Once you're clear, obviously use your brain to make sure that the output is correct or actually feels correct to you. Once you're clear on the top 5 skills they're looking for each one, ask yourself, where have I demonstrated this specific skill? And then turn that into an accomplishment story. For accomplishment stories, you often hear the STAR method, situation, task, action, result. I actually prefer the CAR method. Challenge, action, result. 3 are easier to remember than 4, and it is actually much more effective to talk about a challenge than just a task. So, CAR, challenge, action, result. We start with the challenge you faced. You want to give them the context of the story and explain the challenge or the problem that existed. Then you're going to share the action that you took. You're going to describe the specific steps that you took and which skills and strengths you used. Make sure that you mention the skill here that you identified as one of the skills they're looking for and that you actually want to demonstrate in this answer. And then the results you achieved. You want to tell them the outcome, including any quantifiable results or achievements if possible. So I'm going to use an example again to walk you through a car story step by step. So the challenge, the situation or the background at that time, the challenge you faced, and how was that impacting your work, your team, the organization? So one example of how the challenge might sound like is in early 2025, our community experienced a major decline in event participation, which threatened funding tied to engagement metrics. We needed to quickly rebuild engagement despite having limited budget and staff resources. That is the challenge. Now, what did you do about it? What actions did you take? What were the specific steps that you did take? What were the strategies, techniques, methods that you used? Here's an example of how that can sound. I led a community feedback initiative to better understand resident interests and identify barriers to participation. Based on those insights, I developed a targeted engagement campaign that included themed community events and a revamped communication strategy across social media, newsletter, and our website. I also implemented an ongoing feedback process so we could continuously refine our approach based on resident input. Now they can picture you doing it. See, we didn't talk about, in general, if there is this challenge, I'll do A, B, and C. No, we're very specific. In this one specific incident, here's exactly what I did. And the interviewer can now picture you in their head doing this. And obviously their mind is going to go to, oh yeah, I can see her doing that. I want her to do that for us. And then you bring in the results. What was the result of the action? How did that benefit your organization or your team or the work that you're doing? And are there any quantifiable results or specific achievements? So this can sound like, within 6 months, event attendance increased by 35%, exceeding our target goals. The improved engagement metrics also helped us secure 20% more funding from local business partners. Beyond the numbers, we saw stronger community participation and more sustained involvement in local initiatives. At this point, the interviewer is like, okay, how can I get her on board? I need her on my team. Now, the most common question I get is, what if I don't have any accomplishments? Or what if I don't have quantifiable results? Okay, let's talk about that. So let's start with, what if I don't have any accomplishments? Okay, if you've never done anything, you've actually just spent your entire life sitting, doing nothing, maybe then you have no accomplishments. Even then, you probably do something in your mind. Anyway, it's really hard to have no accomplishments. The hard thing is to actually find them. So the number one question you want to always ask yourself when you think about like, oh, does this count as an accomplishment? Is that worth mentioning? Ask yourself, what would have happened if you didn't do X, Y, and Z? So you did something in your job, right? Maybe it was part of your job. That's perfectly fine. That doesn't mean it's not an accomplishment. You did something and it had a result. If you didn't do that, what would have happened? Are those two scenarios different? Then that is an accomplishment. Your actions led to a different outcome than the outcome that would have happened if you didn't do that. So you've got an accomplishment right there. Now, what if it's not quantifiable? We don't have to quantify every single accomplishment. If you can quantify at least a third of your accomplishments, that is fantastic. Also, think outside the box when bringing in metrics. Were there improvements in efficiency or productivity? Were there any cost savings or financial benefits? Were there any feedback or customer satisfaction scores that were impacted? Did any goals or targets get met? What was the budget for the project?
how many people or teams were involved or impacted? How many users or customers benefited from the end product? What was the timeline or deadline? Or are there any clear metrics like sales efficiency or user engagement? The golden rule here is if there are truly no measurable outcomes, then we want to quantify the environment instead. I'll give you some examples. So instead of saying, I helped streamline internal processes, you want to think about how many internal teams were involved in that. And then you can communicate it as standardized operational procedures across 5+ internal teams, and so on. Or if you have on your resume reviewed contracts and policies, how many? You can turn that into managed review process for 25+ vendor agreements annually. And see, you don't need to know the exact numbers. You can say 25+. You want to be honest. So you want to pick the number where you confidently can say, yes, I know for sure it was more than 25. I don't remember, was it 27, 29? Not quite sure, but I can confidently stand behind it was more than 25. Perfect. You use 25+. Or another example, coordinated product launch activities. It doesn't sound like that much on a resume. But if you turn that into supported launch readiness for customer-facing platforms, updates used by 1,000+ end users, coordinating timelines across 4 departments, now we're talking. So you see that there are so many different ways to quantify accomplishments. Last one I'll share with you is you don't want to say assisted customers with issue. Instead, say resolved high volume customer inquiries while maintaining service support for 100+ client accounts during peak operational periods. So those are examples where you can add in metrics without having the actual number or where you have a clearly quantifiable outcome. And yet we have numbers and a really strong accomplishment. Now that we have your interview answers nailed down to a T, you have your car stories that you're going to go into the interview with. And then when you're asked a question, you just have to pick which story is most relevant to that and share that with the interviewer in the challenge action result format. The third really important piece on nailing your job interview is to ask questions at the end. I've sat behind a recruiting desk for many, many years, and I cannot tell you how many people I interviewed that when it was their time to ask questions, they're like, I don't have any questions. That is a red flag. How can you actually want to spend 40 hours of your week here in our organization every day and you don't have a single question? That's impossible. Anywhere I'm going to be going for 40 hours every week, I have a lot of questions, a lot. And you barely know anything from the job description or maybe the company website. And this is your opportunity to learn. It's a two-way street interview. Just how much they're assessing you, you're assessing them to see if there is a mutual fit. So do not skip the opportunity to ask good questions. I recommend to have 5 questions prepared. You only want to ask 3 in general, but just in case some of those were answered during the interview already, you have a bank of 5 questions to pull from. And asking questions really is a way that demonstrates your engagement, that you're thinking strategically, and then you're actually enthusiastic for the role. There are 3 types of questions that I highly recommend asking. The first question I recommend asking is one that demonstrates your interest in the position. You can, for example, ask about the challenges that you might anticipate in this role. The second question I recommend asking is a question that demonstrates your drive to excel in that role. What can you ask that doesn't just show you want to do the job, but that you want to take the job to the next level? Ask questions about where there are opportunities for improvements. Can you use new technology? Where's that team going? This is your opportunity to really show your forward and strategic thinking. And then the third question, you want to ask one that demonstrates you research the company. You want to add in something that you learned about the company and ask a question about that specifically. For example, if they're currently in a product launch, you can read about that product launch and then ask something specifically related to that. So the interviewer knows you've done your homework. All right, that was point 3. Ask questions. At the end of the questions, we need to close that interview strong. You do not want to say, if they ask, like, do you have any more questions? You be like, no, I asked my 3 questions. I'm good. Thank you. End of the interview. No. You are missing the biggest opportunities to leave that interview, leaving a really strong, lasting impressions. The first few minutes and the last few minutes of an interview are the most important ones to really stand out. So, to close the interview, you want to have a strong closing statement prepared. In that closing statement, which should be about 3 sentences long, you want to thank the interviewer, you want to express your excitement for the position in the company, and you want to highlight why you are the ideal candidate to solve the problem this position exists to solve. So, for example, you want to say, if they ask, do you have any more questions? You say, no, thank you. It was super insightful to hear your answers on the questions I just asked. At this point, I don't have any further questions, but I do want to thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this exciting role. I am really passionate about designing innovative, science-backed digital learning solutions that drive sustainable behavior and personal growth. And I believe that my unique blend of creativity, strategic thinking, and deep understanding of learner needs really perfectly aligns with what your company is looking for. And what I want to leave you with is that I'm not just excited about this position. I am confident that my proven ability to craft transformative learning experiences makes me an ideal candidate to help your company achieve its vision of human transformation. Did you hear what I just did there? I thanked them. I expressed how excited I am. I reminded them what makes me unique, what is my superpower. I told them that I know what their problem is and that I am the one to solve their problem. And I tied it all back to their company's mission. Now, when you leave that interview, they're going to be like, wow, that was good. And that last closing statement is what they're going to remember after you walk out that door. Now, we're not done yet. We have a 5th point, and that is sending a thank you note. If there's one thing fewer candidates did than ask questions, it was sending a thank you note. People don't do it. And I know that advice is out there everywhere, and I could have bet my life savings on that almost every candidate sends a thank you note. Till I became a recruiter and found out maybe 1 in 100 does it. So you sending a thank you note makes you really, really stand out. So as soon as the interview is over, I want you to take notes about what you learned in that interview, because you're going to need those notes to write your thank you note. And it's still fresh in your mind. So after the interview, take a deep breath, get a sip of water, relax for a minute, and then take notes about what you want to remember after the interview. Take another little break, and then get on writing your thank you emails. You want to make them personable, and you want to summarize again what you want them to most remember about you, and again remind them how excited you are about the opportunity. The beautiful thing about a thank you note is not just that it summarizes why they should hire you, but also it brings your name back into their memory. When you're thinking about, and I'm bringing in a different example here outside of the hiring process, but when you're thinking about sales, marketing, a marketing department always wants to bring the product they want you to buy in front of you as many times as possible, because you're not going to buy the first time you see or hear about it. There is a similar approach to that in the hiring process. You don't want to be overly annoying, obviously, but you want to keep reminding them about you and the value you bring so that you stay top of their mind. And a thank you note does exactly that. They might interview 10 people that day, and the last thing at the day, they get your thank you email. They're like, oh yeah, She was really awesome. I remember her. And you're the one interview that they remember from that day. So with the thank you note, you want to send an email to each individual that you interviewed with. Make it personable, reference something from the interview. Again, reiterate how you are the solution to their problem and how excited you are about the position. Now, those were my 5 top tips to succeed in a job interview. We'll summarize here. Tell me about yourself. Start the interview strong with a solid tell me about yourself answer that introduces you and tells them right away that you are the solution to their problem. Then have your CAR, your car stories prepared, challenge, action, result, that showcase the skills you want to be known for. Ask questions. Ask good questions that show your interest and excitement for the role you're interviewing for. Close strong. Have a strong closing statement that again reminds them of why they should hire you. And then finally, number 5, send a thank you note. Now, I do have a bonus for you because the number 1 question I get after the interview is, when should I follow up? So the golden rule for following up on your interview is if the interviewer provided a timeline. So they said, we're going to get back to you next Tuesday. Your follow-up date is going to be 2 days after the date they told you. So if they say you're going to hear from us next Tuesday, if you have not heard by Thursday, you're going to send a follow-up message. If they do not provide a timeline and they did not tell you anything about when you can expect to hear back, then you're going to give them 5 business days and then follow up asking about next steps. Hopefully with all these tips, this won't even apply to you. But for the off chance that you receive a rejection, which I know really, really, really sucks, and also you can turn rejections into job offers. I had a client who interviewed for a role at a higher ed institution and was rejected for that role. She was really heartbroken. We got together and sent an email to that hiring manager, being very, very graceful about the rejection. We started us off as, thank you so much for your thoughtful message regarding this role. While I'm disappointed not to be joining your team, I really appreciate the opportunity that I had to learn more about the company, the organization, and the team. And your team's commitment to whatever came up in the interview was so impressive. And it was clear throughout the interview process that the department fosters a culture of excellence and collaboration. And then we tell them that we're still interested. I remain very interested in the direction the company is moving toward, and I'm keen to find a role that aligns more closely with my expertise in whatever that is, where I can contribute to the organization's mission. And that's where we made an ask. And that ask that's going to come next is what turned into a job offer. The next paragraph we wrote in this email is, could you possibly recommend someone within your organization with whom I could have an informational conversation about future opportunities that might be more closely aligned with my background? And wouldn't you know it, the person, the hiring manager who received her email, was so impressed by how she handled the rejection and that she is so excited and interested in the organization that she's still interested. He connected her with a department head from a different department. That person interviewed her. Within a month, she had a job offer. That's how you can even turn a rejection into a job offer. And as a bonus, I will provide you with this email template in your download for this podcast episode. And I know right now the job market is tough. There's a lot of competition, but I also know there's going to be the right opportunity out there for you. With all those tips and tricks that you've learned in this episode, you are equipped to handle interviews and really set yourself apart from others and show them that you are the candidate that deserves the chance and the opportunity. And also remember that in the end, you just need one yes that can potentially change the entire trajectory of your career and maybe even your life. If you would like some more support as you're preparing for interviews, book a free career clarity call with me and my team, and we can support you individually. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Career Clarity Unlocked. I hope to see you back here next week. And until then, please remember that you have agency. You can be in the driver's seat of your career. If it doesn't feel this way, get into the driver's seat now. Take charge of your career. Focus on where you want to go and what is the best way to get there. And I'll see you back here next week on Career Clarity Unlocked.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Career Clarity Unlocked. If you're feeling stuck in that what's next spiral and are ready to finally break free, let's chat. You can book your free career clarity call where we'll uncover what's really important to you, tackle any obstacles holding you back, and map out your best next step. Schedule your free 30-minute call today on careerbloomcoaching.com. And before you head out, be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify so you never miss an episode. If today's conversation gave you new insights and inspiration, please leave a review. It really helps us reach more amazing listeners like you. And don't forget to share this episode with a friend or on social media. Your support truly means the world. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.